Watergate scandal and why it caused Nixon to resign. And I just want you to keep in mind that the Watergate scandal was one of many associated with the Nixon administration. But when it all came out, um, many other crimes were revealed. And so that also had a lot to do with the reason why Nixon resigned. Okay, and I also want to point out that I phrased the aim this way because I just wanted to remind you that Nixon was, in fact, not impeached. He was going to be impeached and would likely have been removed, but rather than go down that route, he just decided to resign instead. Okay, so let's go through our introduction here, where we see Nixon and his foreign policy achievements. So we know that he's still fighting in Vietnam, and he kind of escalated involvement in Vietnam, even though he promised not to, but he did try to de-escalate a little bit with his visit to China and his overtures to the Soviet Union and the beginning of something called détente that we'll talk about more another day. But that means an easing of tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. He also signed the SALT Treaty, which stands for Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, and we'll mention that another day as well. But that was a treaty between the United States and the Soviet Union to limit weapons, and so that is, an example of détente because it was an easing of tensions. Okay, so foreign policy, were kind of split for Nixon. And then he managed to get 60% of the popular vote in 1972. So this is his reelection. Um, and that's the election at issue in the Watergate scandal. So in the Electoral College, McGovern was only able to carry the District of Columbia in one state, while Nixon took most of the electoral votes. At this point, we see the new 26th Amendment in effect, which allowed 18 to 20-year-olds to vote. A little historical context for that would be the Vietnam War. If the federal government is requiring that 18-year-olds go over and risk their lives for their country, they certainly should be able to vote. So they were allowed. But Nixon won a resounding victory. Then in June of 1972, 5 men were arrested for attempting to electronically bug the Democratic Party headquarters in the Watergate apartment complex. And so that's why this whole incident is known as Watergate, and why they add gate to modern day scandals like Bridgegate and Deflategate for your sports fans. Okay, so then, at first it was seen bizarre, but then they uncovered that this break-in was related to the Committee to Re-elect the President, which has an acronym of CREEP. Okay, so we might refer to it as CREEP during this lesson. All right, so Nixon repeatedly claimed that he didn't have any information and anything like that. So during the course of the investigation, while they were investigating this particular break-in, it was revealed that Nixon recorded all of his phone conversations and his conferences in the White House. So the prosecutor, looking to get this information, subpoenaed the tapes, meaning asked a judge to force Nixon to turn over the tapes. And Nixon refused, claiming executive privilege, saying that there were national secret security matters on the tape. Okay, and then the case went up to the Supreme Court, and this is our brief of the case. So this is a little bit of a summary here, but I'll just read through it quickly, that Nixon was running for re-election, and his political campaign group was caught breaking into the Watergate Hotel where the Democratic National Headquarters were located. Then they revealed that there were some recording of his conversations in the White House, and Nixon refused to turn over unedited tapes. He did provide some, but not all. And the question before the court was, can the president use the idea of executive privilege to conceal information that might be connected with a criminal investigation? And executive privilege conveys the idea that the president, as head of the executive branch, has the right to keep certain discussions secret and confidential and concealed from the other branches of government in order to effectively do his job. And so that's what Nixon was revealing on, this idea of executive privilege. And the Supreme Court said no, that you can't use executive privilege to cover up criminal activity. And so the precedent of this case, very, very important, is that the president is not above the law and must turn over the tapes. So the impact of this case was tremendous. The tapes revealed that Nixon knew about the break-in and was involved in planning the criminal activity. The House of Representatives started to draft articles of impeachment against the president, and Nixon resigned rather than face impeachment. Okay, so this is the big deal about the Nixon cover-up. So he was trying and did cheat in the 1972 election. That is an absolute corruption of our democratic system, and it could not stand. Okay, so that is why that was such a big deal. However, there were a lot of other things, which I'm hoping you read through, that showed that Nixon was corrupt through and through. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the other offenses and then we'll classify them. Okay, so we have this Bunker Hill case, where Robert Allen, president of Gulf Resources and Chemical Corporation, contributed $100,000 to CREEP. And it was a lead and zinc mining and smelting operation in Idaho called the Bunker Hill Company. In March of 1972, the EPA said it was going to impose stiffer air pollution control standards. And then after April 3rd, the EPA dropped the stiffer standards, and Bunker Hill profits that year were $86 million. So let's just absorb that for a second. They were going to impose stricter standards. The company made a $100,000 donation, and then the Environmental Protection Agency decided to drop its stiffer standards. That's clearly an example of an illegal contribution. The Quarter Pounder case. Okay, in order for you to understand this story, you need to understand that the economy was tanking in the 1970s due to the OPEC oil crisis. We'll talk about that another day. But in order to try to save the economy, the government was trying a lot of different things. One of the things that they tried was these price freezes so that companies could not raise its prices. Okay, so now let's read our story about McDonald's. In 1971, McDonald's raised its price for the Quarter Pounder cheeseburger from 59 cents to 65 cents without authorization from the Price Commission. In May 1972, the Commission ordered McDonald's to reduce its price. Between May and September, Ray Kroc, the owner of McDonald's, contributed over $200,000 to CREEP. In September of 1972, the Price Commission reversed its decision and granted McDonald's price increase. Okay, so this again, an illegal contribution. The Vesco case. Robert Vesco, a financier, was investigated by the SEC on charges of impropriety in business practices. Vesco contributed $200,000 to CREEP, and the SEC investigation was postponed. Later, the SEC filed suit against Vesco, and he demanded that the contribution he made to CREEP be returned, and it was. Okay, so this is kind of a ridiculous case of customer satisfaction. He gave his money to CREEP. He did not get what he wanted, so he demanded a refund, and he got one. Okay, so this just kind of shows you how it was business as usual, this type of thing, and so that's going to go in illegal contributions as well. The carpet case. All right, they were going to put a stricter safety flammability on carpets. And then the carpet industry contributed $200,000 to CREEP, and then they dropped the new standard for carpet safety. Again, illegal contributions. The Seafarer case. The Seafarer International Union was indicted in June of 1970 for a violation of a federal law. The gist of the indictment was that SPAD, the Seafarers Political Activity Donation Committee, was a sham, and that through SPAD, the union made political contributions to Nixon totaling $750,000 of union funds. The indictment also charged extortion of contributions from union members and from foreign sailors. So they were roughing up their union members in order to give money to Nixon. In September of 1970, the district court dismissed the indictment for lack of prosecution. So let's explain what that means. So some people within the federal government brought this indictment. So they are charging this union with a crime. And then they didn't really enforce it. So there was a lack of prosecution. And one of the things in the Sixth Amendment says that you need to have a speedy trial. So if the government is not pursuing their indictments, that's not speedy. So the court dismissed it. And then they just abandoned the case. Why? Well, they got $750,000. So they just dropped it. That's going to go in illegal contributions also. Greek case. We have this man named Thomas Pappas, a wealthy Greek-American businessman, held dual citizenship. He was a fundraiser and a chairman of CREEP in the finance department. He made 11 round-trip flights to Greece on company business. Less than 12 days before the election, 2 Greek nationals contributed $25,000 each to CREEP. One of the men owns an oil company in Greece. In December, his oil company was awarded a $47 million contract for the refueling of the United States Sixth Fleet based in Greece. So that was a really good return on his investment. They put, let's say, $50,000 in and got a $47 million contract out of it. Did I say? Yeah, $50,000 in and a $47 million contract out. So that's going to go in illegal contributions. The milk case is another situation where it's an illegal contribution. They put up dairy import quotas to reduce competition for milk. Okay, so that's the last one that's going to go in illegal contributions. And now we switch gears here. Nixon ordered illegal wiretapping of 13 government officials and 4 newsmen. So he's spying on people. That's going to go in breaking and entering. Could also go in dirty tricks. Enemies list. Nixon requested the IRS, this is the Internal Revenue Service, that's the federal agency that collects people's money in taxes, so they could investigate all of your finances and really harass you. And so he instructed them to move against left organizations and have them audited and harassed. That's going to go in dirty tricks. Plumbers. In June of 1971, Nixon personally approved the creation of the Special Investigation Unit within the White House, later called the Plumbers, to stop the leaks. You get it? Nixon ordered them to find out all they could about Daniel Ellsberg. Later, the group was ordered to go into California and break into Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office and photograph his psychological file. And they did this. Okay, so this is going to go in breaking and entering. And it could also go in dirty tricks and cover up obstruction of justice, because Ellsberg, they're trying to ruin his name, so that's why it's a dirty trick, and they're trying to hide information from the public. Okay, this judge case. So during the time when Ellsberg was on trial for leaking the information about the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times, the president's aide met with the judge. And Ehrlichman, who was a member of the president's team, interviewed the judge for a job as possible FBI director. So they were basically trying to bribe the judge with a better job to try to bring down the hammer on Daniel Ellsberg for stealing this information. And the judge eventually declared a mistrial. So let's say that this is certainly obstruction of justice. The Watergate break-in, well, that's clearly breaking and entering. Then officials of CREEP lied under oath when asked about Nixon's activity. That's going to be a cover-up and obstruction of justice. And gifts, this is going to be miscellaneous, meaning that Nixon donated his presidential papers and later claimed false tax deductions. So he wasn't paying his fair share of taxes. Okay, so I have this here, and I think I just wanted to add the plumbers in, and I'll just leave that here for now. But let's go back to our aim. Why did the Watergate scandal force Nixon to resign? Okay, so you can think about that, and please respond to the AIM response on the piece of paper. or attach your own, that's fine. But I want you to try to include some of the ideas that we talked about today in this video. Have a great day, everybody.